Hi, my name is Keith Milner. I live in England near a place called Reading, which is about 30 miles to the west of London. As well as an interest in music and music production, I am also a fan and user of open source and Linux. I'm going to talk to you today about how to prepare the open source DAW application ARDA using the project checklist as a guide. Part of this includes setting up the environment known as Jack. In the Lesson 2 video lecture on project checklists, Loudon described 5 things to consider when setting up your DAW for a project. We will set up the ARDA DAW on a Linux environment using this checklist. But what is Jack? Jack is a framework for professional audio applications that runs on Apple, Mac and Linux. It provides a number of really useful capabilities that allow you to connect and synchronize multiple audio applications. Before we can use ARDA, we need to start the Jack server, and so we need to set up Jack. Many of the parameters on our checklist are configured within Jack, so we can configure those items now. We will use an application called QJackCTL, which is in the software repositories of most Linux distros. It's a nice easy way to use Jack. The QJackCTL window has buttons to start and stop the Jack server, to view the log messages, to configure audio and MIDI connections between applications, to control the transport clock, and it has a status window which shows the state of the server, the transport clock and some other useful information. And of course it has a setup button. If we click up the setup button, we can configure the audio parameters. First, we need to make sure the driver is correct. On Linux systems, it's normal to use the ALSA system driver. It's normally the default on Jack as well. Here we can also select the interface we want to use. I want to use the audio interface called VS20. On Linux, the bit depth or word length is controlled by the driver in the ALSA subsystem, and Jack inherits this setting, so we can't configure it here. The ALSA configuration varies depending on audio interface and driver, so we're not going to cover that here. We can configure a sampling rate in Jack. It's currently 48,000. I'm going to set it to 44,100 because I know this interface supports that better. We can also set the buffer parameters here. I can set this to 1 to 8 frames per period, and it's currently set at 3 periods per buffer, which is good. That gives us a latency in a region of 8 to 9 milliseconds. As you can see, there's plenty of other parameters here which can be used to fine-tune the settings for Jack. You may need to adjust those depending on your audio interface. You can also, if you wish, store multiple configurations as a named preset and recall it later. However, in this case, we're just going to click OK, and that will save the settings as the defaults. We can now press the Start button to start up the Jack server, and the status will reflect the status of the server. So now we have configured the digital audio preferences, the hardware settings for the audio interface, and the buffer size. Next, we will configure the project name and location. When you first start up ARDA, it asks to create a new session or to load an existing session. We're going to create a new session. I'm going to call this ARDA 3 test, and I'm going to put it in a pre-production folder that I've already created previously. When ARDA starts up, you can then go in and make any changes you need to make to the session. If you go onto the session folder and select Properties, and then go onto the Media tab, you'll see the audio file format. At the moment it's 32-bit floating point and a WAV file. We want to change that to, for example, 24-bit integer and broadcast WAV. Close the box and the settings are saved. So we have now given the project a proper name and put it into a sensible location, and set the recording file type. We are now ready to start recording. So that is how to prepare the ARDA DAW under Linux using the project checklist. I hope you enjoyed it, and if I have inspired you to consider using Linux for audio in the future, recommended Linux distros for audio are KX Studio and Ubuntu Studio.